Bonjour et bienvenue, fellow board members, our CEO and Pallium team, subject matter specialists, facilitators, partners, sponsors, and to all who are present. We recognize that Pallium Canada's headquarters are located in Ottawa, an unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We extend our respect to all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples for their valuable past and present contributions to this land. We also recognize and respect the cultural diversity that First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people bring to the City of Ottawa. Nous souhaitons reconnaître que le siège social de la Fondation Pallium Canada est situé à Ottawa sur le territoire autochtone traditionnel de la nation algonquin Anishinaabe. Nous souhaitons exprimer notre reconnaissance à la Terre-Mère et pour les ressources que nous utilisons, ainsi qu'honorer les peuples des Premières Nations, Métis et Inuits, qui vivent sur le territoire depuis des temps immémoriaux. And now my message as chair. The start of the pandemic was a defining moment for Pallium, and the past 6 months have resulted in many paradigm-shifting developments for the organization and its future. Pallium has found itself playing a pivotal role in supporting frontline healthcare professionals and focused more than ever on how we can better support healthcare teams responding to COVID-19. One thing is clear, the pandemic has laid bare the need for better palliative care across the continuum of care. A special thanks to the support of the Canadian Medical Association, Pallium Canada contributed to frontline preparedness. As well, Pallium was able to successfully launch a fully online version of LEAP, our Learning Essential Approaches to Palliative Care. A special thank you goes out to our incredible facilitators, many of whom have completed their online orientation, training, and have begun facilitating sessions online. As we look forward, we are committed to bringing new and flexible ways to access the Learning Essential Approaches content that complement and support the strength of existing LEAP courses and face-to-face training. In spite of the impact of COVID-19 pandemic, Pallium still had its most successful year to date. Our achievements, which will be highlighted throughout our annual general meeting, are the result of collaborative efforts between many individuals and organizations that are committed to improving the accessibility and quality of palliative care in Canada. Thank you to our colleagues, facilitators, supporters, partners, and subject matter experts who were able to come together to share much needed expertise and experience with colleagues from across the country during a challenging time. What follows in our report to you today is a direct result of your collaboration, commitment, and hard work. As our communities and healthcare system navigate the challenges presented by COVID-19, Pallium Canada will continue to advocate for palliative care so that collectively we can better provide better care to patients and their families. Le début de la pandémie a été un moment déterminant pour Pallium et les 6 derniers mois ont entraîné de nombreux changements de paradigme pour l'organisation et son avenir. Pallium a joué un rôle central en matière d'appui aux professionnels de la santé de première ligne et s'est concentré plus que jamais sur la manière d'améliorer le soutien offert aux équipes de soins de santé répondant à la COVID-19. Une chose est claire, la pandémie a mis en évidence la nécessité d'améliorer les soins palliatifs dans tout le continuum de soins. La réponse de Pallium à la COVID-19 a été rapide et décisive. Grâce au soutien de l'Association médicale canadienne, Pallium Canada a pu contribuer et soutenir l'appui aux équipes de soins de santé. De plus, Pallium a pu lancer avec succès une version entièrement en ligne du LEAP, les essentiels de l'approche palliative. Merci à nos incroyables animateurs, dont beaucoup ont terminé leur formation d'orientation en ligne et ont commencé à animer des sessions en ligne. Pallium s'engage à proposer des moyens nouveaux et flexibles d'accéder au contenu des essentiels de l'apprentissage palliatif qui complètent et soutiennent la force des cours et des formations en face à face existants. En dépit de la pandémie de COVID-19, tous les défis qui ont résulté de ça, Pallium a quand même connu sa meilleure année à ce jour. Nos réalisations qui seront soulignées au cours de cette réunion annuelle est le résultat d'efforts concertés entre de nombreuses personnes et organismes et organisations qui se sont engagés à améliorer l'accessibilité et la qualité des soins palliatifs au Canada. Merci à nos collègues, nos animateurs, facilitateurs, sympathisants, partenaires et experts en la matière qui se sont serrés les coudes pour partager une expérience bien nécessaire avec les collègues de tout le pays pendant une période des plus difficiles. Ce qui suit dans ce rapport à vous aujourd'hui est le résultat direct de votre collaboration, de votre engagement et de votre labeur. Alors que nos collectivités et notre système de soins de santé font face aux défis présentés par la COVID-19, Pallium continuera à défendre la cause des soins palliatifs afin que collectivement, nous puissions fournir de meilleurs soins aux patients et à leurs familles. Avec ceci, je termine mes propos au départ. Je vous reviendrai tout à l'heure. I would like to finish with my comments at this time and pass on the floor to Jeff Moat, our President and CEO, who has his messages and report as well. And I'll see you when we get back at the end of the meeting. Over to you, Jeff. À toi, Jeff.
Thank you, Jerry. Merci, Gérald. And my presentation will be coming up in just a moment. Okay, so a very warm welcome to our guests, our employees, our facilitators, our cherished stakeholders and friends. Thank you for being part of our annual general meeting. Bonjour, mesdames, messieurs, et permettez-moi de vous souhaiter de nouveau le bienvenue à l'Assemblée générale annuelle de Pallium Canada. Leading Pallium as CEO is both a tremendous honor and a huge responsibility. So I would like to thank the board of directors, not just for their support and counsel, but also for the trust they've put in me in this regard. Normally, we would all be in front of many of you, sharing our exciting accomplishments and our way forward for the next year. But there is nothing normal about the times we all live and work in. The past 6 months have been tough on all of us, and uncertainty can lead to fear. Many times it seems there are more questions than there are answers. But as you will learn, we are working diligently to meet these uncertainties head on, providing the oversight and direction that enables Pallium to remain nimble and adaptable to the changing situation. And we are adapting. I want to begin by providing you with a snapshot of the past year that highlights some of our key activities by quarter. As you can see, 2019 was a very busy year for Pallium, and advancements were made on many fronts, a few of which I'd like to highlight, while others I'll touch on a little bit later in the presentation. Pallium continued to invest in its IT ecosystem by launching Salesforce. A customer relationship management system helps us manage contact information for tens of thousands of our partners. It also supports our sales funnel and the tracking of support and service calls that come in through email, chat, and phone. We improved our service to our clients by launching a new, easy-to-navigate website and by offering a direct delivery service that relieves partners of the work to organize and deliver a LEAP session within their organization. We continue to invest in LEAP programming, launching LEAP Hospital, LEAP Emergency Department, LEAP Paramedic Online, and most recently, LEAP Online, while also renewing our 2 flagship products, LEAP Core and LEAP Mini. We launched the Compassionate Community Exchange, a digital space for individuals to contribute to the conversations surrounding compassionate communities in Canada. We unveiled the Compassionate Workplace campaign, an exciting new initiative that I'll speak about a little later. We further diversified our sources of revenue by securing financial support from 3 new funding partners. We hired a director of corporate partnerships and renewed our contribution agreement with Health Canada. Pallium also received its charitable status. We augmented the bench strength of our board by welcoming Louise Bradley, President and CEO of the Mental Health Commission of Canada, and it's a true gift to have someone of Louise's caliber on our team. So as you can see, it has been a very productive year, one full of promise, and one that ended in a way that ultimately transformed this organization. I'd like to briefly share a strategic initiative that was launched very early in our fiscal. Pallium undertook a comprehensive branding initiative to develop a new narrative for the organization, which will enable us to speak with a consistent voice to different audiences. The work included a new brand architecture, which encompasses the current and future suite of courses and tools and a new visual identity. This initiative provided an opportunity for the team to come together and contribute to an exercise to articulate our shared vision and mission. This process resulted in a refresh of our brand, one that better aligns with our focus and direction as an organization. This exercise also included an overhaul of our website, one of the most important tools that our stakeholders use to interact with our work. The key focus of our website redesign was on user experience, increasing the functionality of the site and ensuring information is clear and easy to find. The outcomes from this branding exercise has helped to inform everything that we do, from the way we behave and act, how we visually portray ourselves, to the way we market and communicate with our key audiences. But most importantly, our new brand is a promise on the high value and exceptional experience our clients, stakeholders, and facilitators can expect to receive every single time they interact with us. And the more we can deliver on that promise, the stronger Pallium's value will be in the minds of all those we serve. Our brand mission, well, first off, the brand mission is focused on today. It's what an organization is doing to achieve its vision. It answers the question, why does this brand exist? The mission statement really drives this organization. We equip all healthcare professionals and communities with the knowledge and tools to provide palliative care for every Canadian. And a vision statement is aspirational, and it showcases the future direction that we endeavor to achieve. A vision statement gives Pallium direction, and it should also be difficult to achieve, hence the aspirational nature of it. It goes back to what Pallium has always wanted, that every Canadian should have access to palliative care. We explored a range of visual identity options that focus on evolving our logo from the old version that you can see right now to one where we modified core visual equities of the brand that ensured familiarity to our core users, a refreshed color palette, and involved word mark and icon. Lastly, our brand manifesto is our public declaration of intent, a collaborative approach to building palliative care capacity to benefit all Canadians. I believe it will become very clear how we are indeed living this brand as I continue to share the highlights of our work in 2019. So let's begin by looking at our key performance metrics this past year. Pallium's growth in 2019 continued unabated. Double-digit growth rates were realized across all metrics, including revenues, course sessions, learners, and facilitators. These results are the outcome of an incredible amount of work undertaken by a very dedicated team of individuals. There are many factors that contribute to this level of achievement, notably impeccable client service and account management, business development, funding partners, a relentless pursuit of meeting client needs, and a supportive board. There are a number of important initiatives that were developed and launched that I'd like to share with you, some of which will influence the strategic direction of this organization moving forward. And I'd like to start with Pallium's response to COVID-19. Now, while these activities unfolded towards the very end of our fiscal, given the magnitude of effort that Pallium undertook, I believe it's worth sharing as part of this year's report. With the onset of COVID-19, palliative care protocols were quickly shifting to manage end-of-life care in healthcare systems. Furthermore, social isolation and visitation restrictions in homes, hospitals, hospices, long-term care facilities resulted in frontline healthcare providers becoming the primary and sometimes the only source of palliative care support for patients. The impact of COVID-19 on frontline healthcare providers to address palliative care needs suddenly became both a professional and, frankly, a national healthcare crisis, further validating the need to rapidly create and disseminate resources and training to help support healthcare providers manage during the pandemic. Pallium boldly stepped up early to meet that challenge and delivered critical information, resources, and tools to ensure care providers were properly prepared. I want to start first with our people, our most precious resource. Pallium wasted no time in ensuring the safety of its employees by mandating a work-from-home policy days after the pandemic was announced. This transition was facilitated thanks to the foresight of the team that had already enabled staff with full remote working capabilities, including our contact center. Our team has remained engaged and professional throughout this very tumultuous time, and I'm happy to report everyone's healthy. There have been no disruption in our client service metrics, development activities, or contractual deliverables. And despite the Zoom fatigue that has touched all of us, based on a recent employee survey, our team feels that we've taken appropriate action in response to COVID-19. They have confidence in our ability to overcome the challenges it has created, and that they have the tools they need to effectively work remotely. Let's turn our attention now to our frontline heroes. Thanks to an investment from the Canadian Medical Association, Pallium was able to prioritize the development and launch of Leap Online, a facilitated learning program that can be completed entirely virtually. The course consists of 16 self-directed and interactive online modules completed at the learner's own pace, and 2 3-hour online webinars led by LEAP facilitators, where learners work through the cases and discuss learnings from the online modules. These facilitators, by the way, completed an online certification course. This course was built by Canadian palliative care experts, and upon completion, participants will receive a LEAP certificate of completion and electronic copy of the Pallium palliative pocketbook. LEAP Online has been recently accredited by both the College of Family Physicians and the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada. And there are currently 16 LEAP Online sessions completed or were scheduled for delivery by the end of October. So momentum is beginning to build for this product. Let's move on to our free online modules. Again, in collaboration with the Canadian Medical Association, Pallium provided access to essential education on palliative care for all healthcare professionals via 10 online palliative care modules. The modules provided healthcare teams with an introduction to the palliative care approach, focused on the important knowledge and skills required during the pandemic response. What started as a 3-month initiative quickly expanded to 5 months, given the sheer demand for this information. As you can see, the uptake from the free online modules was an immediate success, with over 9,500 distinct learners from across a variety of healthcare professions accessing the modules over the first 3-month period. And as you can see from the slide, over 10,900 healthcare professionals have actually registered to date. To put this number into perspective, prior to COVID-19, Pallium would train on average about 7,000 distinct learners over the course of an entire year. So in 3 months, we exceeded our full year target by 36% and realized a 400% increase over the same time period in 2019. So this initiative is truly pan-Canadian, reaching healthcare providers from coast to coast to coast, and even attracting 135 international learners. This is a trend that Pallium has not experienced in the past with traditional face-to-face LEAP training, so it's very exciting. On to our webinars. On April 3rd, and thanks to the financial support received by Boehringer Ingelheim and the Bridging Hope Initiative, Pallium launched a series of free live webinars that bring subject matter experts together to present information and answer pressing questions from healthcare workers dealing with cases due to COVID. Our webinars serve 2 purposes. 1, they help disseminate new knowledge related to managing COVID, and 2, they capture tacit, emerging, critically important information from healthcare experts across the country and share that new emerging knowledge in real time. Webinar topics have included personal protective equipment in the home, managing dyspnea, end-of-life care in the emergency department for patients imminently dying of a transmissible acute respiratory infection, just to name a few. As you can see, we've held to date some 19 webinars. A total of 11,000 individuals have registered for these webinars and over 5,200 have attended. As every webinar is recorded and uploaded to Pallium's YouTube channel, you can see tens of thousands of people have ultimately went to view these webinars online. Attendees from every single province and territory participating in these webinars, and the majority of attendees are registered nurses, physicians, social workers, PSWs, to name just 4 of the 16 professions represented. And although the vast majority of attendees are from Canada, 23 other countries are represented. We've heard directly from participants that the information shared in these webinars is helping them to troubleshoot problems on the front lines of care, such as medication shortages. When it comes to palliative care, the healthcare system is only part of the equation. Family caregivers often carry most of the care load. As life expectancies increase and medical treatments advance, more and more of us will find ourselves caring for a loved one at home. Equally challenging is that many of us do not live in the same community as our loved ones. Compassionate communities widen the circle of caring and provide much needed support to patients and caregivers. It encourages and mobilizes people in the broader community, such as neighbors, friends, coworkers, to advocate and provide practical assistance and support. Pallium's tools and resources help community champions create more supportive environments in their communities for patients, caregivers, and families who are experiencing a serious illness, caregiving, or grieving. The pandemic has demonstrated that it is more important than ever to have a strong and compassionate workplace culture. The need for compassion in the workplace is greater than ever. And this statement was well true before the pandemic arrived. And the need to ensure our employees who are caregiving, grieving, or themselves are experiencing a serious illness are properly supported. And that has been amplified by a pandemic that is exposing many more of us to new and different forms of grief. Millions of Canadians have had their work and personal lives disrupted. As a result, employees are experiencing new types of grief, unable to support each other in traditional ways, and suffering greater stress and anxiety. COVID-19 is forcing serious illness, grief, and caregiving into the spotlight by amplifying the number of employees who need support. The pandemic demonstrates that it's more important than ever to have this strong culture in place. And with this in mind, Pallium launched the Compassionate Workplace campaign ahead of schedule, an initiative that provides employers, managers, and employees with practical tools and resources and activities to help increase awareness, reduce stigma related to serious illness and caregiving and grief in the workplace. So what has our learning been from COVID-19? There's been a hurried effort to increase palliative care capacity during the pandemic among healthcare professionals who might be called upon to provide palliation. Long-term care establishments in particular have suffered, in part, from staff who are underprepared and unable to provide basic standard palliative care needed for patients with serious illness. The need to educate healthcare workers during a crisis has revealed a fundamental flaw in how Canada prepares and supports its healthcare professionals to provide palliative care. Proven solutions to proactively deal with this reality exist and have been already paid for by Canadian taxpayers. And as we know, the federal investment in Pallium Canada has generated a significant return on investment. Given the heightened need for training and the explosive uptake of our COVID resources, it is clear that our work at Pallium is absolutely essential. Thanks to our national network of partners, subject matter experts, facilitators, and learners, coupled with 20 years of experience of developing practical and evidence-based solutions to increase the quality and accessibility of palliative care in this country, Pallium has been able to respond to the needs for palliative care training and to get this information out to tens of thousands of healthcare professionals. And it is the same group that has made us agile, responsive, and quick in our ability to address the changing needs. But I believe most importantly, our response to the pandemic has underscored our need to continue evolving how we reach and develop and support healthcare professionals with information and content across their entire learning journey, from just-in-time resources to more fulsome, deeper knowledge that meets their specific learning needs. This is our new normal. In spite of a very strong year for Pallium, the COVID-19 pandemic has hit care systems, palliative care stakeholders, and the nonprofit sector very hard, and we're no exception. In less than a week, every single LEAP course that was scheduled was canceled or postponed indefinitely. Our second largest stream of revenue essentially vanished. Our business model, however, is robust. Firstly, our introduction of LEAP Online and the transition of our key LEAP courses to online formats has begun to insulate the organization financially and supported and enabled the continuation of our clients' professional development activities. And secondly, many of our clients have merely put their face-to-face professional development needs on hold for the time being. Everyone we've spoken to are confident that this will return. Despite the extraordinary circumstances that prevail right now, we are confident Pallium will still be able to call 2020 a successful year. We believe that conditions will gradually improve into 2021 as economies slowly reopen and lockdowns show signs of ending. But in the short term, our focus really has been on business continuity, specifically addressing the cessation of face-to-face LEAP courses with Pallium's growing suite of online courses, with a focus on building our revenues up to pre-pandemic levels. Continued effort on targeting funding opportunities with prospective corporate partners is required and will be enabled thanks in part to the work of our newly established Partnership Advisory Committee. The swift uptake of the Compassionate Workplace campaign is a strong indication of the need for this type of resource, and in response, we've begun to mobilize our team, including hiring a dedicated resource to promote this initiative and begin onboarding new companies and organizations. We're doing everything we can to ensure the business continuity of our customers as well. The feedback from countless conversations with customers shows that even in this crisis, Pallium has proven to be the reliable partner. Over the past 20 years, Pallium has been successful at developing and delivering face-to-face professional development and training through its interprofessional accredited courseware that you know is called LEAP. Since 2014, we've trained over 29,000 learners across this country. We've built a network of 940 certified facilitator trainers. We've developed a suite of 18 accredited courses, and which has helped to change practice and improve how palliative care is being delivered to patients and families. Digitization is revolutionizing the education sector, and technology is changing the classroom. Transformative technology is enhancing teacher instruction while simultaneously creating immersive lessons that are engaging for learners. How people are learning has been evolving for some time. For example, as educators have realized that classrooms have to mimic the workforce, which has inspired them to create collaborative, friendly spaces to facilitate student learning. To stay relevant, Pallium must evolve as trends and behaviors change. Education is evolving for the sake of betterment, and this generation's learners are not born to be confined by the limits of simple learning. Their curiosity is vast, and it cannot be catered with educational systems that were designed decades ago. Digitization offers the ability to support a more collaborative learning environment and working culture. It does not diminish the value of classroom learning. That's very important, but rather it walks with it hand in hand, each as a support system to the other. Digitization isn't a new concept to Pallium. In fact, as early as 1998, our scientific officer was developing interprofessional web-based learning and case-based support for healthcare professionals in rural Alberta. But as was demonstrated in the resources Pallium expeditiously developed to meet care provider needs during the pandemic, we must continue our efforts to extend our value proposition online. This represents a fundamental shift in how Pallium will continue to build palliative care capacity. Rather than being a course provider, this revolution affords Pallium the opportunity to evolve and to become a trusted educational partner with its learners and the organizations it serves, delivering customized solutions to meet specific individual needs across the entire learning journey, from a student's humble beginnings in school to across their entire professional career, all facilitated by various technologies. This vision will require a shift in Pallium's knowledge transfer strategy to a largely, but not exclusively, digital service offering. It'll require an in-depth analysis on the learning needs of various healthcare professionals, an understanding of health systems' future professional development needs, an enhanced information architecture to support a more robust learning experience, and a commitment to fresh content and service offerings to encourage ongoing learning and engender loyalty. This solution will also require a more fulsome knowledge offering that includes intuitive learning suggestions to direct learners, deep dive modules, live monthly webinars, online journal clubs, knowledge exchange forums, downloadable tools and resources, to name just a few. In our new path forward, we envision Pallium becoming an online learning destination for palliative care that offers sustainable, future-proof education. It'll serve to deepen a learner's knowledge, encourage and facilitate a lifelong learning mantra, connect remote learners with a larger community, minimize business risk from threats such as a pandemic, and accelerate palliative care capacity building efforts to ultimately provide better care to more Canadians. Done properly, it can serve as a model of excellence and ultimately expand to serve other parts of the healthcare system. That is the opportunity that lies in front of us, and we're ready for it. Before I conclude, I would like to take a moment to thank our funding partners, each of whom enable us to undertake our work to equip healthcare professionals and communities with the knowledge and tools to provide palliative care to every Canadian. We thank them for their generosity and ongoing support. And it gives me great pleasure to formally announce our newest partner to join our funding family, the Li Ka-shing Foundation. The Li Ka-shing Foundation has demonstrated a commitment over many years to support education and health initiatives in Canada with a strong history of transformational gifts to universities. The Li Ka-shing Foundation's support will enable us to grow and spread LEAP online and train an additional 3,000 healthcare professionals across Canada over 18 months. Targeted outreach will be made to those healthcare professionals in urban, rural, and remote communities who actually participated in all of our COVID activities and took advantage of our free online modules. We're very excited about this new partnership and would like to thank Li Ka-shing Foundation for their support of our mandate. Ladies and gentlemen, as I near the end of my remarks, I thought it would be important to leave you with some final thoughts on why Pallium. Since our founding 20 years ago, our goal has been to improve the quality, timeliness, and accessibility of palliative care in this country and improve the lives of patients and their caregivers. That goal has never been more important than today. And as you heard me say earlier, it is as much built into our brand DNA as it is our incentive. Together with my colleagues, we will do everything in our power to succeed. What we stand for is what makes us who we are, the leader in continuing professional development in Canada, a reliable partner for health systems and communities of all sizes in every part of the country, in every setting of care, and in every community. With our partners, we will continue to build a Pallium that remains agile, connected, innovative, and customer-focused. No one should need to ask why Pallium. We think it's obvious. We answer this question every day with everything we do and everything we make possible. Next year, I want to be able to look back at 2020 together with you and say, we did it. We beat the challenges. We listened to the people we serve. We continued to improve. We delivered. We grew and shaped the future together. not just for our clients, but for all Canadians. Thank you very much. Take care of yourself and each other. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce my cherished colleague, our scientific officer, Dr. José Pereira. José, over to you.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you, Jeff, and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us in this very special AGM. And I say it's a special AGM because it was 20 years ago that we were founded to advance primary level palliative care capacity across Canada, so that all Canadians can have access to palliative care when they need it. Now, truth be told, it actually started about 1 or 2 years before that. In 1998, the precursor initiative that became Pallium, and it was really looking at rural education, interprofessional education, and yes, online education. It has been a gigantic effort over the years by hundreds of committed Canadian clinicians, educators, researchers, and healthcare leaders, amongst many others, across the board, across the regions, to bring us to where we are now. We have built the foundation, we have tested the innovations, and we've started to spread them and scale them. In some cases, they've spread right across the country. In other cases, they've even been scaled up. But in some cases, there's still lots of work left to spread and scale. But we know what is needed, and we know how to do it, and we've proven the concepts, and we continue reaching out to find new ways of doing things even better. Now more than ever, we need to acknowledge the contributions by so many people and organizations over the years. The list is too long for me to thank everyone individually. Jeff has already thanked some of the partners. If you have had any part in developing, spreading, supporting, or even championing Pallium Canada's work, and I know there are thousands of people and organizations in Canada out there who've done that, and even internationally, a very big thank you to all of you. Next. To the funders over the years, especially Health Canada and the Patrick Gillen Estate, thank you. This past year, funding from the Canadian Medical Association, Beverley, Kingelin, as we've heard, have been critical with our COVID-19 pandemic response. I'm sure that if they could, the patients and families who've benefited from this work would be joining me in expressing their gratitude for all the support received. To organizations like the Canadian Partnership Against Cancer and the Canadian Foundation for Healthcare Improvement, who have helped spread and scale up LEAP paramedics across the country, thank you. And in a few minutes, I'll share with you a story and experience that illustrates how strategic it has been to train up the paramedics. There's lots of work still to be done in LEAP long-term care to reach out to long-term care facilities, but the work has been started. The individuals who've contributed to developing and teaching the LEAP courses across the country, the organizations and teams, small and large, that have adopted and championed it in the organizations as the right thing to do to improve the care they provide, thank you. To my colleagues who work now in Pallium, and to all those colleagues who have worked previously in Pallium, thank you. This has truly been a pan-Canadian effort and a pan-Canadian success story. And let's not forget our compassionate communities efforts. Pallium Canada was a leader in adopting that approach. Already back in 2001, and again in 2003 and in 2013, and several presentations to various government committees, we have highlighted the importance of compassionate communities and have made the case for funding to support compassionate communities programs. It's fantastic to see the concept take wings in Canada, and I'm proud that Pallium Canada has contributed to getting some initiatives started and continues through its Compassionate Communities Toolkit to contribute alongside others to the development of these very important grassroots efforts across Canada. Next slide. Several experiences have reminded me recently of why Pallium Canada is still relevant today. In fact, the COVID-19 pandemic is showing that it is even more relevant today than it was 20 years ago. Let me share some of these stories, and in doing so, you need to know that I will be wearing my hat as a clinician and an educator in a health region in the Hamilton, Niagara, Haldimand, Brant area of Southern Ontario. In the early days of the pandemic, The team that I work in Hamilton and the Niagara region reached out to several long-term care homes that we knew had not yet integrated palliative care in the care they provided, including training their staff on the palliative care approach. As we all know, the long-term care sector was particularly hard hit by the pandemic. For a number of reasons, our efforts to reach out and help was not completely availed of. One of the reasons was that they were understandably overwhelmed by the pandemic. Another was lack of funding to support palliative care training, because for organizations like the public long-term care homes, hospitals, and nursing agencies, they experienced significant funding barriers to cover the costs of training all their staff. In our region, interestingly, the long-term care sector approached the local hospital emergency departments to provide them with telephone support during the pandemic. And this included support for palliative and end-of-life issues. The emergency medicine physicians were very quick to recognize their own limitations in this area, namely providing a palliative care approach. And so they contacted us in the Division of Palliative Care at McMaster to train them rapidly. We did so, and we were able to do so because we were able to mobilize some of the LEAP emergency medicine and LEAP long-term care material that we had. It was right off the shelf, ready to be used. And so the process was rapid. It was a fast mobilization of those learning resources. I applaud our emergency department colleagues for recognizing their skill gaps and for taking the initiative of doing something about it. We are hoping soon to start using the LEAP ED program even more within the organization and hopefully have it spread and scale across the whole country. Similarly with LEAP Hospital. As in many other regions across the country, the palliative care experts in our region, while at the forefront of developing clinical guidelines during the pandemic, were actually often sidelined clinically. And one of the main reasons for this was that hospitals and COVID units tried to reduce the staff working in them, or at least reduce the risk of contagion by not having other people from other parts of the hospital come into these units or services. So staff on many hospital units and even some long-term care homes were limited to only the regular staff that worked on those units. Healthcare professionals from across different professions and settings were left to provide palliative care for patients who needed it, without often the direct support of palliative care team, without often the palliative care training that was required. In some cases, they were able to get, often virtually, support from palliative care teams, and other cases not. Imagine the burden of suffering that would have been reduced if all these professionals in hospitals and long-term care homes and in the community had been prepared with the palliative care approach ahead of time. We heard stories of some long-term homes that had prepared ahead of time, and what a difference that had made. In the Hamilton region, we heard of family physicians who had done the training and were able to provide palliative care to their own patients in homes and in other inpatient services. In Hamilton, the emergency services had still not implemented palliative care training to all its staff. They had only a very small pilot project happening. And the training that they did do was for paramedic staff, were primary paramedic staff who were not able to administer medications. So in those early weeks of the pandemic, when we were trying to mobilize a rapid response strategy for patients experiencing precipitous deterioration, because as we learned, in some cases, the decline happened very rapidly, within minutes and hours. And so we needed someone, a professional, who could get there very quickly, assess the situation, and administer the appropriate palliative care medications for those patients who wish to stay at home. We weren't able to do that in the Hamilton region. But just a few kilometers away in the Niagara region, they had trained up their staff with LEAP paramedics and had put in place the policies and procedures to allow their paramedics to do this type of work. And they were able to mobilize the services. And we've heard from other paramedic services across the country that had trained up their advanced palliative care, their advanced paramedic staff, that it made a difference, and they were able to mobilize resources and respond quickly. On the palliative care unit that I work in, we had an outbreak of COVID-19 disease. And in accordance with the local policies, these patients were transferred to one of Hamilton's main hospitals, which had been designated as the COVID hospital for the region. One of the patients was a man with advanced disease who still had many months of life left and was very appropriately still on several heart medications alongside palliative care treatments to palliate his symptoms and improve his quality of life. He was actually quite asymptomatic from his COVID disease. His needs related more to his heart disease. That afternoon, the internal medicine resident who admitted this patient in the other hospital phoned our unit and berated one of our very experienced nurses for not having provided good palliative care. He said we should have stopped all medications and focused only on sedating the patient and keeping him comfortable, because that, he said, was good palliative care. Now, this was clearly inappropriate and reflected this resident's wrong impression that palliative care is only about the last days or hours of life. This resident had clearly never received any palliative care training, and as a result, the patient was about to be subjected to inappropriate treatment. Now, this story also illustrates one of the other victims of the pandemic, palliative care itself, and particularly the notion that palliative care is not limited to only the last days or weeks of life, but across the illness trajectory. I think that the pandemic, as this resident demonstrated, has not only exposed gaps in palliative care competencies that still exist widely, but has taken us back with respect to integrating palliative care earlier. Think back to what you've heard on the media and the discussions heard. It's often a dichotomy between being placed on a ventilator and the possibility of responding versus receiving palliative care. Because that language relates to palliative care being not only in the last days, but in this case, just the last hours. So we've got lots of work to do to go back and educate and to ensure that healthcare professionals and the public know that palliative care is not just about the last days or last hours of life, and that there is a strong research base and evidence to show that if you initiate palliative care earlier, it's got so many more advantages to patients and to the healthcare system. If only the resident had done palliative care training, if only that training were available with few barriers, including cost barriers. And this applies to all residency programs and beyond the medical school, to the schools and colleges of all the health professions, including nursing training. This effort of getting the future healthcare providers in our country trained up with the palliative care approach requires the whole village, as it were, to contribute. This includes support and funding from provincial and federal sources. I must admit, it feels like a situation where there's an effective vaccine, but we cannot access it because of costs. So we do need the support of everyone. We also saw in our region and surrounding regions the power of being enabled with palliative care skills. When one of the regions close to us needed to mobilize more family physicians in the community to provide palliative care, not only for COVID positive patients, but patients with advanced diseases and with palliative care needs not related to COVID, they turned to Pallium Canada to help them identify those family physicians who had already done LEAP training. These doctors represented ready-to-go expertise and were able to be mobilized. Next slide. The last experience I wish to share relates to a paper we are working on describing the 20-year journey of Pallium Canada, its successes, disappointments, and the factors that have facilitated the spread and scale up and the barriers that we've experienced. This is one of the diagrams we are sharing in the paper. And I know it looks very busy and the font size is small, but I want to share with you that this diagram describes the journey over 20 years. It maps out the milestones across the years and the various phases. It maps out the funding that we've received and also demonstrates and shows times where there was no funding. And we tried really hard to keep it going. We kept it going, but during those times of no funding were the times where we weren't able to go much into innovations and go much into large scale spread and scale up. There were many milestones, many successes, and in many areas, including palliative care needs for our Indigenous peoples, developing palliative care call centers in Western Canada, just to name 2 examples. The second diagram demonstrates the growth of LEAP course delivery over the years. Phase 1, which was from 2001 to 2003 on the left side of this diagram, was a phase where we did all the testing, the concept, started developing communities, started seeing the benefits of collaborating. We were going out to small communities in the rural prairie provinces. 17 courses were delivered during that time. Then in the second phase with funding from Health Canada, and that was from 2004 to 2006, 2007, we were able to do 43 courses across the country, as well as up to 72 other sub-projects across most parts of the country. As you can see, the numbers have been increasing. Previous slide, please. The numbers have been increasing of the number of LEAP courses happening across the country. So we need your support and help, and that includes endorsement and advocacy, so we can start seeing an exponential curve now, because it's only with an exponential curve that we're going to be able to really start getting to all the needs. This is fantastic achievement to get to over 500 courses in 1 year, as we did last year, and then thousands of learners, as has happened during the COVID pandemic. But it's only the tip of the iceberg. There are tens of thousands of healthcare professionals across different settings, across the country, who still need to be trained up, as those stories illustrate. Next slide. The next diagram is the one that shows the number of different LEAP courses delivered from late 2014 to date. You'll see hundreds of LEAP core courses. But you also see some courses where very few have been delivered yet. Well, that's because they're in the initial stages. We've completed their piloting, they've been fine-tuned, and they're ready to launch. Others have been spread regionally. So LEAP Renal, for example, we've done over 40 courses, and the 26 renal services in Ontario have been trained up. So the doctors and nurses, pharmacists, social workers working in these renal programs have been trained up in LEAP. It's now time to scale that up across the country. In hospitals, there's a great need to train healthcare professionals in the palliative care approach. Well, through partnerships with the Lake Ridge Health, east of Toronto, around Oshawa, the Durham region, we've started implementing LEAP Hospital in the hospitals. And the LEAP emergency departments, we're in partnership with the William Osler Health Centre in the west of Toronto. We've been able to start piloting and start implementing LEAP emergency department, and also beginning at McMaster. Next, please. The next diagram is actually taken from another paper that we published earlier this year in June in the Journal of Palliative Medicine. And you're welcome to look it up and read it. If you Google Pallium Canada Curriculum Development Framework, you should come across it. It's available open access. Now, it looks like a complicated program, and what it sketches out is the multiple levels and the multiple of work and the multiple processes that go into developing the LEAP courseware. But because we've been doing this for a number of years, we're now able to leverage existing materials. We're able to leverage experience. We're able to leverage content that now speeds up the development of new courses and new programs, and make us a lot more nimble, and provides us with an economy of scale that doesn't exist in other countries, where they're having to develop different programs for different settings separately. Next. So in summary, Pallium Canada represents an amazing amount of work by many people and organizations across the country. It represents fantastic support from many organizations, again, regionally, within healthcare organizations, provincially, and across the country. It truly does represent a Canadian success story. It is a story and program that has prompted many countries, some of them in less developed regions of the world, to approach us for our help, expertise, and support. To all those who've contributed in the many different ways across the years, thank you once again. And to those who have the ability and influence to help us spread even further and scale up, we look forward to working with you to improve the lives of Canadians. Thank you very much. At this point, I'd like to hand over to Beverley Lepine, who's the chair of our Pallium Canada's Finance Committee.
Thank you, José. Bonjour et bienvenue. Comme chef du comité de finances et vérification, je vais présenter les états financiers pour l'année qui termine le 31 mars 2020, vérifiés par nos vérificateurs indépendants. Kelly Hubers McNeely, our independent auditors, have audited the financial statements and have provided an unqualified opinion, which reads as follows. In our opinion, the accompanying financial statements present fairly in all material respects the financial position of the foundation as at March 31st, 2020, and its financial performance and its cash flows for the year then ended, in accordance with Canadian accounting standards for not-for-profit organizations. The auditors highlighted the professionalism and support provided by Erin Kelly and her finance team. As indicated by our chair and our CEO, the final quarter of the 2019-2020 year was impacted by the COVID epidemic, including course cancellations in March 2020. Results were lower than budget. However, Pallium achieved a year-end surplus of $263,000, demonstrating the strength of Pallium's continuing investments in people and technology. The 3-year, $6 million contribution from Health Canada came to an end. An additional $450,000 was awarded early in the new year. Self-generated revenues from course delivery and business development increased 28% over the previous year and exceeded $1 million for the first time in Pallium's history. Expenses were lower than budget. However, continued investments in technology allowed for online course development and remote workplace tools that gave Pallium an advantage in the continuing COVID-19 months that have followed. Uncertainty and financial risk continue to be the watchword for the coming year, but Pallium's balance sheet is healthy with cash balances of close to $1.9 million and an accumulated surplus of close to $2.3 million. The financials for the year end March 31st, 2020 are available on request to Pallium Canada. The board of directors passed a motion approving the financial statements for the year ended March 31st, 2020, and also passed a motion to reappoint the Ottawa firm of Kelly Hubers McNeely as Pallium's auditors for the year end March 31st, 2021. That concludes my report on the financial results for the year. I believe the next presenter is Donna Kingelin, who is the chair of the Governance, HR, and Compensation Committee.
Thank you, Beverley. Good afternoon. The Board of Directors has approved a motion to re-elect the slate of directors and officers to the Pallium Board for 2020 and 2021. Gérald Savoie as chair of the board, Rabbi Balka as first vice chair, Debbie Weinstein as second vice chair, Beverley Lepine as treasurer and chair of Finance and Audit Committee, Dr. José Pereira as scientific officer, Jeff Moat as CEO, Dr. Sereni Sherry as honorary member, Louise Bradley as director, and myself, Donna Kingelin, as chair of Governance, HR, and Compensation Committee. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of the directors and officers for their ongoing dedication, expertise, and leadership that they provide to Pallium to advance its mandate. I would now like to turn it over to a video from Dr. Sandy Buchman, the past president of the Canadian Medical Association. Thank you.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to be part of Pallium Canada's annual general meeting. I regret that I cannot be there virtually in person with you today, so we figured that doing this video presentation was the next best thing. Today, I'd like to share my perspective on the importance of palliative care during the pandemic, indeed the essentiality of palliative care in these very precarious times. I also want to talk about what we can learn about our experiences as we anticipate our collective future. In speaking to you from Toronto, I wish to respectfully acknowledge that I'm on the traditional territory of the Mississauga, Anishinaabeg, and Huron-Wendat. The territory is covered by the Williams and Upper Canada Treaties. I offer my gratitude to our First Nations for their care of and teachings about our earth and our relations. May I honor those teachings. My only disclosure is that I receive a stipend from the Canadian Medical Association in my role as past president. So the date is May 16th, 2020. This is Ms. DK. She was a 92-year-old survivor of the Holocaust. She was suffering from advanced Alzheimer's dementia and multiple comorbidities. She lived in a long-term care facility in Toronto and received excellent care. She was able to recognize her family, including her son, who happens to be one of my closest friends. He calls me and I could hear the desperation in his voice. He's told by staff at the long-term care facility that his mother appears to be having more respiratory difficulty, sounding really congested. Alan knows her COVID-19 test is negative. She's no longer eating and drinking, and they believe she's dying. This is at the height of the pandemic in Ontario, and no visitors allowed to her long-term care facility. Her goals of care were clear: to be allowed to die comfortably in her own room, familiar to her and surrounded by her loved ones, something that she never got to experience with her own family when she lost her parents, grandparents, and her siblings in the Holocaust. Alan and his family are at a complete loss of what to do. They have no assurance that she'll die comfortably and with dignity, so important to a woman who lived her whole life with her head held high, just full of gratitude for her life in Canada and just happy to be alive. It pained them deeply to think that she might die with her symptoms not controlled and alone, with no loved ones by her side, and it grieved them so to think that they could not be there with her, holding her, talking softly to her. Alan is crying on the phone. Sandy, can you help us? So as we prepare for a possible second wave, we need to recognize and act on the lessons we have learned from the first wave in order to ensure Canadian patients and their families can benefit from those lessons learned. So today I want to talk about 3 key ways in which palliative care is so important in a pandemic. First, there are the patient management and ethical challenges revealed by the pandemic that must lead us to become better prepared for a second wave. Second, there are the health system gaps and weaknesses that can be addressed by palliative care. And lastly, I hope to demonstrate that palliative care is an essential healthcare component of any humanitarian healthcare crisis. During the pandemic, and likely in coming months, I expect the need for palliative care to increase substantially, especially if we have a twindemic, the convergence of COVID-19 and influenza, which could put the capacity of our healthcare system at risk once again. Late in March, I co-authored a paper published in the CMAJ entitled Pandemic Palliative Care, Beyond Ventilators and Saving Lives. In it, we outlined some of the challenges that we as palliative care providers might face in addressing the anticipated high mortality that would be experienced by Canadian residents as a result of the pandemic. How sadly right we were, particularly in long-term care. In these uncertain times, discussion around palliative care and advanced care planning has never been more important. The COVID-19 pandemic has pushed the demand for palliative care to new levels. As supply chains have been broken and demand has surged, we've seen shortages of equipment and drugs. It's brought to light new ethical considerations around allocating critical care resources where demand outweighs capacity. And it's made even more evident what the gaps in our system are. The challenges we've seen in our long-term care homes have really brought to light the need to ensure palliative care is being provided outside of hospitals and within the community through long-term care, home care, and hospice care. And that includes building stronger connections between primary care and continuing care. The pandemic is changing the way we think about advanced care planning and palliative care as healthcare professionals and as patients. In our paper, we outline the palliative care issues that must be addressed in order to be able to deliver palliative care comprehensively to everyone in a pandemic. And we group them according to stuff, staff, space, systems, sedation, communications, and equity. So stuff. First, we need to address medication shortages that have occurred during this pandemic, both in hospital and in the community, and might I add, for the foreseeable future. We need to ensure that we manufacture and stockpile medications used in ICU and in palliative care, like morphine, haloperidol, methyltrimeprazine, midazolam, and scopolamine, and prepare symptom management kits which contain these drugs, both in long-term care settings and in residential hospices, as well as at home. We need to suspend regulations that limit the availability of prescription injectable morphine and hydromorphone. We have to stockpile equipment used to deliver medications, like CAD pumps. We also have to stockpile PPE specifically for palliative care providers in long-term care and community settings. Now, staff. We have to identify and mobilize all clinicians with palliative care experience if other physicians and nurses are overwhelmed with caring for their patients. We need to provide brief education for frontline providers on symptom management, especially for acute respiratory illness, a role that I think Pallium could play a big part in. We need to emphasize the safety of symptom-targeted opioids as an early option for symptom management, and we have to engage allied health to provide the emotional support to patients and bereavement and grief support to family members. What about space? Beds in hospice and palliative care units must be used for patients who do not have COVID-19. And that can be accomplished through a direct admission from the emergency room or the community. We have to identify separate wards and non-clinical areas in the acute settings that might be appropriate for those expected to die, essentially palliative care units for patients with COVID-19. Thinking about systems, we have to create a triage system to determine which patients require specialist palliative care consultation and which patients can be seen virtually. We'll have to maximize the use of virtual care, both for efficiency and to reduce the infection risk. Standard order sets need to be developed for acute long-term care and community settings. Palliative care provider groups need to be formed that can provide coverage if a patient's own provider becomes sick or overwhelmed. We have to address the failings, weaknesses, and gaps in Canadian senior and long-term care. And there's more to say about this in the next slide. Perhaps nothing has been more tragic during the COVID-19 pandemic in Canada than so many deaths among the residents in long-term care. I have so many questions. How did they die? Was palliative care involved for most, even virtually? Did they receive comfort measures for symptoms? For emotional and psychological and spiritual suffering? Were most alone? What is the grief and the bereavement like for their loved ones? We have learned much from the tragedy in long-term care. Yes, there are these questions, but we know what we have to do to correct all the gaps and weaknesses in the long-term care system, from old infrastructures to personal support workers having to travel from one home to another just to cobble together full-time work. But what of palliative care? There are still so many things we don't know. My suspicion is that most of the seniors who died in long-term care did not receive adequate palliative care. The dedicated nurses and personal support workers who cared for them day in and day out were too overwhelmed to offer much more than holding hands and calm words through the barrier of PPE. The tragedy of long-term care begs for a palliative care approach and more advanced care planning discussions. We know that this has been lacking in many long-term care facilities across the country. We cannot ever right the wrongs of this national shame until a palliative care approach is integrated into long-term care in every jurisdiction in Canada. And what about sedation? It's quite apparent that many healthcare professionals are not knowledgeable about the option of palliative sedation for symptoms that are refractory to common comfort medications. Palliative sedation became necessary for so many who died of COVID-19. We need to be prepared to use more palliative sedation as a comfort measure. Separation and social isolation of patients from loved ones has been one of the most serious challenges of the pandemic. Many facilities enabled video calling to connect patients with family members who were separated because of travel and visitor restrictions. Every patient should have access to technologies such as phones or iPads to be able to communicate with loved ones, and for clinicians to hold goals of care conversations and family conferences virtually. Having a sufficient supply of PPE for family members who wish to visit their loved ones at the end of their lives in every setting, acute care or the community, is necessary. Advanced care planning is an urgent priority and should form part of a health system's COVID-19 response strategy. Why? Really to reduce the need for rationing and for dealing with surges in healthcare demand. Advanced care planning respects human rights by protecting a person's autonomy to choose, and it enables proactive care coordination. Advanced care planning is associated with a range of positive health outcomes, including reduced use of life-sustaining treatments, increased compliance with patients' end-of-life wishes, and reduced symptoms of depression and anxiety amongst bereaved relatives. People with frailty or comorbid illness should update their advanced care plans and indicate if they wish to avoid transfers to hospital for critical care in the event of serious illness. We have come to see the pandemic as an opportunity to communicate advanced care plans and documentation between healthcare settings to ensure concordance between preferred care and actual care. Perhaps virtual care can help in increasing advanced care planning discussions and to help explain issues around physical distancing limitations and visiting. Before the expected surge in patients, especially if we are faced with a twindemic, or are unable to flatten the curve either through public health measures or through the use of a flu vaccine, providers must review treatment plans with their usual patients, those with advanced cancer, end-stage organ failure, frailty, or dementia, who may be requesting life support or CPR. These patients are unlikely to survive and recover after an admission to ICU. In the pandemic context, being admitted to hospital may come with the risk of periods of isolation from visits from family and the possibility of dying alone, as we've already mentioned. Facilitated advanced care plans involving healthcare providers helps patients and families to discuss their concerns with opportunities to address misinformation and unfounded fears. This demonstrates to patients and families true patient-centered care. It shows how health providers continue to value patient preferences in spite of having to enforce strict infection control measures. Let's also consider the value of health promotion and harm reduction benefits during the pandemic that have been discussed here today. Has the pandemic provided an opportunity for Canadians to actually be more open and talk about death, about dying, about loss and caregiving as everyone's civic responsibility? Is death literacy awareness improving? I think this remains to be seen. Or will this just all be forgotten before long once the pandemic is behind us? Do we have an opportunity to develop compassionate communities? A hopeful change for the future might be how the principles of community engagement that have been developed by Kelly here as part of a broader approach might actually increase the use and documentation of advanced care planning. So back to Ms. DK. The family cannot reach the attending physician in long-term care. Nurses and attending staff are run off their feet, and despite their best efforts, they cannot really attend to Ms. DK. I find out that there is no morphine at the facility and likely none can be delivered for about 48 hours. We live in an area of the country that happens to have family doctors and palliative care physicians that can visit long-term care facilities, but given all the restrictions and the pressure they're under, none are able to come on an urgent basis. The head nurse at the long-term care facility felt the only option was to send Ms. DK to the emergency room so she could be admitted to hospital and receive appropriate symptom management. This was definitely not Ms. DK's or her family's wish. When she had capacity, she clearly indicated that she wanted to be allowed to pass away peacefully at home, wherever home was. No one ever anticipated a pandemic with these incredible restrictions. So what about some of the ethical challenges that we've been facing in this pandemic era? First of all, there's patient autonomy. Palliative care providers are usually involved in the shared decision-making between clinicians and patients and their families in the end-of-life context. In a pandemic or a twindemic, patient autonomy to choose life-prolonging measures or location of death may be severely restricted due to public health directives and limited resource availability. So here's something palliative care providers know so well, a side benefit, might I say. When we protect core bioethical principles of autonomy, dignity, and informed consent in healthcare decision-making, even in constrained and extraordinary situations like the care we provide in a pandemic, healthcare providers experience a higher meaning and shared purpose of their work. And this is a critical protection against moral distress. And of course, this moral distress has become a significant issue for all healthcare providers during this pandemic. Triage systems in humanitarian settings, particularly in acute ones, seem to have a very low sensitivity to the need for palliative care. Most aim for the most. People who are unlikely to survive are often neglected because their treatment can be seen as diverting resources from salvageable patients. I'm a family physician practicing in palliative care in Toronto. I work in the community making house calls and have been working in environments pictured here: the city streets, homeless shelters, rooming houses, boarding houses, drop-in centers, traditional housing units, and subsidized community housing. I've seen, and indeed we have all seen, the disproportionate impact on vulnerable and marginalized populations, unable to self-isolate and at risk because of their multiple comorbidities. And they have also experienced challenges in receiving palliative care. Many of us have been advocating for improved access and care for those more marginalized. The pandemic has demonstrated that palliative care providers should pay greater attention to marginalized patients. When the healthcare system is strained, systemic inequities worsen. Those more marginalized are often not supported by family and loved ones. They may have mental health, addiction, and behavioral issues as well. This lack of advocates put them at risk of being abandoned by the healthcare system at a critical time, such as triage for ventilation. There may be systemic bias against those of Indigenous and racialized backgrounds and people experiencing homelessness. All patients must be cared for. Thus, palliative care becomes the compassionate option to counter this inequity. So why has palliative care so often been absent in the humanitarian response to health crises? During the Ebola crisis, in the absence of palliative care specialists, some overburdened healthcare providers struggled to care for patients with the disease and expressed frustration at feeling forced to turn our treatment facilities into palliative care facilities. In any widespread emergency, which the pandemic certainly is, can we imagine the standard human response of saving lives to minimize suffering to actually encompass both saving lives and minimizing suffering? Overall, there's a prevalent opinion in the literature that it is ethically and practically important for humanitarian healthcare to be better prepared to respond to palliative care needs. Let us, as the Canadian palliative care community, in conjunction with all humanitarian stakeholders, develop an integrated disaster response which includes palliative care as one of its highest priorities, there is always something to offer even at the end of life. The guiding principles for humanitarian action today, the overall goal of humanity, is number one, to protect life and health and alleviate suffering wherever it is found. And number two is impartiality, the universal and non-discriminatory application of alleviating suffering. So what is the power of compassionate palliative care to remind the humanitarian sector of the art of caring, the art of standing with and alongside our patients, of our common suffering, illness, dying, as expressions of our common humanity? Do not underestimate the power of small but potent acts of compassion. That is part and parcel of palliative care. Just to change the topic slightly, but to show another benefit of palliative care, I found the following study really interesting in seeing an additional benefit of palliative care during the pandemic, and that is an educational benefit for non-palliative care providers. In this infectious disease unit in Italy, which was overwhelmed with COVID-19 patients, palliative care professionals were able to provide important on-the-job education and training in a palliative approach to care. The helplessness that many of the infectious disease physicians were feeling was overcome with a sense that they could do something for their patients. The usual care relationships under COVID-19 also underwent a significant change for the ID docs there. They experienced a shared vulnerability with their patients that they hadn't experienced before. The physicians felt as vulnerable as the patient. The typical asymmetry of the care relationship disappeared. So in summary, I hope I've shown that the pandemic has provided an opportunity to reflect on the essentiality of palliative care in Canadian healthcare. That a palliative care approach must be integrated into long-term and seniors care. That system preparedness is critical. And the ethical challenges as revealed by the pandemic can benefit from a palliative care approach. Palliative care is critical and it's a necessary component to address human suffering in humanitarian crises. So for Ms. DK, there was only one solution. Bring her back to her children's home to die with them present around her bedside, with meticulous attention to her symptoms and care needs. I quickly facilitated a private ambulance transfer to Alan's home and arranged for a hospital bed and Lynn Palliative Care nursing services and medication, including opioids, to address her shortness of breath and congestion. PPE was obtained and worn by the whole family. Her symptoms came under control, and her family surrounded her with the love she deserved for about the next 18 hours when she died peacefully in her son Alan's arms. So this sounds like a good news story. Indeed, for Miss DK and her family, it was. It turned out okay. They won't be left with unrequited grief, as so many families have been during this pandemic. She had decent symptom control and with some awareness knew her family was around her. But this was totally inequitable. She received critical and essential palliative care because her family knew a palliative care doctor. She happened to live in a city where home palliative care was available. But what of the hundreds and likely thousands of people across the country who didn't have such access to care during the pandemic, who died alone in long-term care or in an acute care hospital bed, who don't have family members with homes where they can be lovingly cared for? This is the experience of so many during this pandemic in our own country. This is a lack of preparation as bad as the lack of preparedness for PPE or essential drug shortages. This too is a failure of our healthcare system revealed by COVID-19. The inability to deliver palliative care to support patients and families when they need it the most. Let us vow to never let this happen again. Again, the CMA is proud to be working with Pallium Canada and supporting you in your efforts. We look forward to building on our partnership and to continuing our collaboration in the months and years ahead. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you today and for your time and attention. And on the next slide, I've just left some of the references that I've used in preparing today's presentation. Again, thanks, and please enjoy the rest of your meeting.
Thank you very much. What an absolutely astonishing and fabulous presentation. I want to say up front that I've had the pleasure and opportunity of having met our keynote speaker at an innovation lab on palliative care. And this was hosted and paid for by, well, the group of family physicians at McMaster University. They took their own funds to put this together. And it just shows the reach that these investments have. And Dr. Buchman was part of that group. I'll call him Sandy. We know each other quite well now. And in his role as chair and president of the Canadian Medical Association, vowed to make sure that palliative care had its place in our system. And as you can see from our presentation today, that is definitely the fact. So I want to thank him for his leadership, his commitment, and really the very, very thoughtful and forward-reaching and directing presentation that he gave us today. And yes, Sandy, as I say, or Dr. Buchman, let us all vow, and we will certainly take up that vow and reach out. I would like to, in my concluding remarks, just piggyback on what Dr. José Pereira was saying in terms of thank yous. We never can say thank you enough. And I'm talking to all of those, all of you who have been there in the past and present to transform palliative care, to transform Pallium Canada, to bring Pallium Canada forward so that we can continue to make a significant difference in changing how palliative care is viewed and expanding capacity and bringing support of the community and not losing sight of the family caregivers and that whole wraparound piece where the community comes into play to support the family caregiver. But I want to conclude with a very special thanks to Jeff and his team. They've done an outstanding job, continue to do so. They've brought Pallium Canada to the next level and continue to keep changing it. We keep rising higher and higher, and have gone well beyond the call of duty here to actually innovate and continue the magnificent work that's being done. A special thanks to Dr. José Pereira. I know I could go on ad infinitum in terms of thank yous, but I can't leave this session without thanking him as the founder of Pallium Canada. He's been there ever since the first day. His brilliance and genius when it came to taking all of our 18 courses and taking everything out of that may be fitting into a module that would come and support the healthcare providers and physicians and so forth, all of the healthcare providers at the most opportune time and right at the heart of the crisis on COVID-19. And the uptake that took place with the evidence that you saw and what we presented today, I think speaks for itself in terms of need and what we need to continue doing in this regard. So thank you to all of you who have shared and taken this time, and I trust that you will agree with me that Pallium Canada continues to make a significant contribution to building palliative care capacity for all and to all Canadians. We are driven more than ever to make a difference, and you can see the passion and commitment that is there throughout the entire team and everyone who just comes in and makes this happen. I do believe and hope and trust that the analysis and reviews and reports that will come out of the COVID crisis and so forth will point to all of the needs, but in particular the palliative care needs. As Dr. Buchman pointed out, it's an essential, critical need that should be underscored and part of our everyday system, in crisis or not in crisis. So again, I challenge everyone with being supportive, playing your advocacy role, making things happen. If you believe in this as well and see the need, reach out, make sure that people who are, as I call them, decision makers and those who influence decision makers, we're talking about the political types and governments across the country and so forth, anyone who can influence this. The need is there, we are committed, and again, just one huge thank you. Merci beaucoup. J'espère que vous avez bien vu que Pallium Canada a une présence très importante au Canada. Nous sommes passionnés avec ce que nous faisons. On est à notre tout notre soutien à travers le pays. Et puis, ça nous ferait grandement plaisir de vous rencontrer pour en faire plus, continuer à transformer le système, mais aussi dans les opportunités qui vont se présenter sous peu dans les différents rapports et évaluations de ce qui se passe avec le COVID-19, de voir les opportunités là-dedans, de comment est-ce qu'on peut influencer le système à mieux appuyer les soins palliatifs dans tous les domaines, dans un nouveau continuum qui s'étend de l'hôpital jusque dans la communauté et à domicile. Alors, merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. And with this final comment, we conclude the annual general meeting for Pallium Canada. Merci et bonjour.